Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany, where I have new videos every week about books and the geeky mom lifestyle. With the release of Midnight Sun, the latest book in the Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer, which, while nostalgic and wildly popular, is also known for having some problems with racism and problematic depictions of Native American populations, I wanted to offer you some alternatives if you're looking for books about werewolves and vampires written by authors of color. So in today's video, I'm going to be recommending to you 13 books about werewolves and vampires that are written by authors of color. Those of you who follow me probably know I've been doing this project where I've been rereading the Twilight series and vlogging the experience in the lead up to Midnight Sun, which I am going to be reading this weekend. In fact, as you're watching this video, I may already be reading it. And that experience has largely not been a particularly positive one, so I wanted to start looking for some alternatives. In full disclosure, 2 of these books I have not yet read. I'll let you know which ones, and one of them I'm currently in the middle of reading. The rest of them I have read and can recommend. And I am also happy to announce that this video is part of the blog tour for Lobizona by Romina Garber, which is my first recommendation for you if you are looking for books about werewolves. Lobizona is one of my favorite books that I've read this year, which is why I wanted to be a part of the blog tour, and I hope you guys will go and check it out. It just released. My pre-order came in yesterday, and it is beautiful. I am thrilled to have it. Let me just show you, because guys, this book is stunning. Lobizona is a YA fantasy that kind of straddles the line between urban fantasy, paranormal, and portal fantasy. It's so much fun and it's so smart. This one features Latinx, werewolves, and witches. So if you're looking for some good werewolf stuff, this is a good place to go. And it deals with a lot of big issues. That includes issues like undocumented immigrants in the United States, homophobia, and misogyny. It follows a girl named Manuela, or Manu, who is the daughter of an undocumented immigrant from Argentina, and they're constantly hiding. But she also has some very strange things about herself that she has to hide as well. But when Manu learns some secrets that had been kept from her and her mom is arrested by ICE, everything changes and she ventures into an entirely new world filled with werewolves and witches. I loved this one. I think you guys will too. I hope you will go and check it out, and it is available now. So the way I'm going to divide up the rest of this video is first I'm going to recommend to you books that include werewolves or shifters of some sort, and then I'm going to move on to recommending books about vampires. If what you're looking for with the Twilight series is the romance side of things, then I'm going to recommend you check out the Changeling series by Nalini Singh. This is the first book in an ongoing series that is very long, so if you're looking for something where you can binge a whole bunch of books, this is a great one. The first book is Slave to Sensation. It features a romance between a panther shifter and a Psi. The Psi are these humans who've evolved to have these psychic abilities, but are conditioned to have no emotion, except that Sasha Duncan is hiding the fact that she does in fact feel emotion, and that only gets amplified when she meets Lucas, who is the panther shifter. This is definitely more of a steamy adult romance, but the thing that I love about this series is it has great world building, and there's overarching plots that involve political machinations and mysteries, and in this case, hunting down a serial killer. So if that sounds good to you and you're looking for some shifters, the series does have different types of shifters, including wolf shifters, then I would recommend checking out the Changeling series by Nalini Singh. I have 3 more recommendations for you in this category, and to be honest, other than Lobizona, I haven't read much that has sort of traditional werewolf mythology in it. But if what you like about it is sort of this animal shifter piece of it, then I think these all offer something in different genres. My next recommendation for you guys is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. This is an epic African-inspired literary fantasy that is quite dark and intense to read, but in my opinion is kind of brilliant, and this does include characters who are shifters into a wolf and a leopard. I have a more in-depth standalone review video for this book, which I will link up above if you guys want to check it out, where I talk more about the plot and what this has to offer, why I'm not so sure it's really the African Game of Thrones that it was pitched as, but why it might still be worth reading for those of you who would be into this. I will say if you need content or trigger warnings, you're definitely going to want to check them out for this book because there are a whole hell of a lot with them. But that said, it's one that I do want to reread at some point because the world building is so detailed and it includes shifters. My next recommendation for you guys is Blanca y Roja by Mclemore. This is a YA magical realism book that's very much about the characters and the atmosphere. It follows two sisters who are kind of opposites from each other, and their family is under this curse that will eventually turn one of the sisters into a swan. So you have that element of animal shifting in it. You also have another character who for part of the book shifts into a bear. Thematically, this is an exploration of things like sexuality, gender identity, love, family, and sisterhood, and the problems that come when people expect women to be in competition with each other when they really don't need to be. So I thought Blanca y Roja was a beautiful book. It does include some animal shifters and it has some romance to it, so this might be another good alternative. My final recommendation for you, if you're into the more werewolf side of things, is a literary horror novel. This is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is own voices for the Blackfeet Native American representation, and it has this interesting pacing where it has slow creeping horror punctuated by moments of really intense graphic violence. So it's a lot, but I think there's a lot to like here. It follows 4 Native American men who had trespassed on hunting grounds that were supposed to be reserved for tribal elders, and because of things that happened, they're now being haunted by the spirit of an elk in the form of this elk-headed woman who is seeking revenge. So that is all I will say about this. It kind of includes this animal shifty thing, but in like a really creepy way, and if you like horror, this might be one to check out. Moving on, let's talk about vampires, and I have 8 recommendations for you. There were definitely a lot more vampire options, and I think we have some really good ones. First up, I will share the 2 that I have not yet read, but they are on my TBR for this month. First up, I have The Gilda Stories by Jule Gomez. This came out in the 1990s and was called an instant lesbian classic. It begins in 1850s Louisiana and follows a woman who escapes from slavery and begins working at a brothel. While at the brothel, she is initiated into eternal life and becomes a vampire, and The Gilda Stories follows her life over, I believe, the next 100 years. So this is one that I've heard really great things about. It's not one that I have personally read yet, but if that sounds appealing, this might be a vampire book to check out. The other one that I have not yet read is Fire Baptized by Kenya Wright. This is an adult paranormal romance that does feature vampires and shifters, among other paranormal creatures. It follows a woman who is a mixed breed who's shunned from society and has to steal to survive while trying to finish her education and graduate from college. But then she witnesses a murder that she was never supposed to see and catches the attention of a supernatural killer. And that leads into some problems arising. Again, this is one I have not yet read, but it does include vampires, it includes shifters, and it is by a Black author. And if you're wondering which one I am currently reading, it is Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. I am a huge fan of Sylvia Moreno-Garcia's work. This is one of only 2 of her books that I had not yet read, and I'm about a third of the way into this one so far. This is a vampire story set in Mexico City. It's got interesting characters, a variety of different types of vampires, and is drawing on vampire mythology from different parts of the world, including Aztec mythology of vampires, which was not something I was aware of. As an author, Sylvia Moreno-Garcia always puts a lot of Mexican history and culture and mythology into her books, and I can see her doing it here as well. But she also writes really great, complicated characters. It follows a young woman who is a vampire being hunted by other vampires for reasons I don't yet know, and a teen boy who lives on the streets who she ends up kind of taking under her wing to protect him, but also feeding off of him in this sort of symbiotic relationship. It's really interesting. There's murderous vampires in here. So far I'm loving it, and I would be surprised if I didn't continue to love it because I love her writing. So definitely go check it out if you're looking for a good vampire book, Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. Then one of my favorite books that I've read this year is a vampire story. This is Fledgling by Octavia Butler. This is a very different sort of take on vampires, and I do know it makes some people uncomfortable. I will link up above the video where I go more in depth into this if you want to hear details, or as always, you can check my Goodreads, which is linked down below. But I think Fledgling is kind of brilliant and super interesting. The main character is a 53-year-old vampire in the body of a young girl who's like 11 or 12 years old. She wakes up ravenous for blood with no memory of what's happened. So this is an interesting genre blend. It's a vampire story, but it's also part murder mystery, part courtroom drama, but then also in some ways an anthropological study as she really builds out the anthropology and history and culture of this vampire people who are not part of the human species. I really liked this a whole lot, and I look forward to reading more from Octavia Butler. Next, I want to recommend the first 2 books in a series. This is The Beautiful and The Damned by Renee Addier. I have read both of these. I loved The Beautiful, although I think not everybody felt the way that I did. When the first book came out, it was definitely pitched as the return of vampires, and so I think some people were disappointed because you don't really see vampires obviously on the page until pretty late in the book. However, there are lots of vampires in book 2, among other paranormal creatures, where the world really gets opened up and you learn a lot more. The series is set in 1800s Louisiana, and in some ways I think this is drawing on the Twilight series, but in a much better way. We get a more diverse cast of characters. We have a heroine with a lot more agency. We have a hero who's not like super creepy and manipulative. In general, I just think this is good. So if what you really want is Twilight vibes, I would maybe check out this series. I will say book 1 reads a little bit more like a murder mystery that you have to kind of piece things together, and then book 2 is much more of the paranormal romance that I think people were looking for. So if you're looking for that, set in 1800s Louisiana with lots of atmosphere and a diverse cast of characters, I would check out The Beautiful and The Damned by Renee Addier. Alright, I have 2 more books to talk about. One of them I'm putting on this list because I found it on a list of vampire books by Black authors recommendations, even though it's not technically about vampires, but I kind of see why it made the list. This is My Soul to Keep by Tananarive Due. It's book 1 in the African Immortals series, and while they're not really vampires, there is sort of a blood element, and it does involve immortal beings or people who were at one time human and are then made immortal. I would call this quiet horror. Parts of it read like a domestic thriller that takes its time getting going and then eventually turns into more violent sort of horror, but this is really exploring a lot of interesting questions, such as what would happen if humans were made immortal? What would that do to them psychologically and emotionally? How would they view mortal humans, and what would that look like to live a life, especially as a Black person, because the main characters in here are Black, over such a long period of time. And so one of our main characters is this immortal who had been born 500 years earlier in Ethiopia, and we get periodic flashbacks through his life. And so do check out content warnings if you need them for this. There are a lot of them, including the fact that he spends some time in slavery, and we see what that looks like, but also there's some pretty intense violence and some spoilery things that I won't share specifically, although I do in my Goodreads review if you need those, that end up happening later on in the book. But then the modern part of it is about this marriage and what happens if you don't know your spouse as well as you think you do and they're hiding dark secrets from you. The woman in the story is an African-American journalist, and there are some murders, and yeah, I really like this. I think it's super interesting. It doesn't give you any easy answers, and it really plays in the space of moral grayness where there's no easy right or wrong, even when it's very uncomfortable and you kind of want there to be. So not exactly a vampire novel, but it might kind of scratch that itch if you are wanting something a little more on the horror side of things. And the last book that I want to recommend to you guys is A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy. Now, the main characters in this book are not vampires, but there are vampires in this world, and I think this is a really, really great epic YA fantasy. It is African inspired, and it follows 2 sisters who are princesses who have to fight to the death to determine who is going to rule their people. It's really great. I loved the world, the political intrigue, and the secrets that get revealed, and like I said, there are several different types of beings in this world, and one of them is vampires. So A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy might be another one to check out. Hopefully this was helpful and gave you guys some new books to check out, and there's definitely more out there that I haven't read and haven't gotten to, but I wanted to provide this as a resource. If you want to read about vampires and werewolves, but you also want to be supporting authors of color, these are some great options from a variety of different genres, some YA, some adult, some romance, some horror. You kind of have a little bit of everything, and so hopefully everybody can find something that they might be interested in. One last thing thing I want to say before the end of the video is I really hope some of you guys will join me in supporting the Quileute tribe in their goal of moving to higher ground. The Quileute are the tribe that is talked about in the Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer. They do not get any of the proceeds from that book, and there were some things in that book that were harmful towards them and culturally appropriative, and so because it's a series I have been reading and putting money and attention towards, I'm also putting some of my finances towards supporting the Quileute people. I will leave a link down below for those of you who are interested in joining in, but I think it's really an important cause. They are a coastal people, and because of global warming and soil erosion, a lot of their living spaces and the school for the tribal children is in danger often of flooding, and this is causing a lot of problems with education, and so their first priority is to move the school to higher ground where the kids can get the education that they need in a safe space. So I have donated to that cause. I hope you guys will join me in supporting it and donate down below. Feel free to also comment down below if you guys have any thoughts or feelings about anything I talked about in this video, and for your question of the day, let me know if you have other recommendations. Do you know of other great werewolf or vampire books by authors of color that people should check out? If you are looking for more recommendations than what I suggested here, check out the comments down below. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.